Every gambler knows that the secret to surviving.
I don't wanna take advice from fools.
You always won every time you placed a bet.
Money, that's what I want.
Joe Duffy, CEO of OffshoreInsiders.com. I'm going to introduce you to the most revolutionary statistic in all of sports gambling. It is performance gap analysis. Way back in the 1980s, when I was first getting started taking sports gambling full time, we used to subscribe to the Jim Feist Sports and Gaming Newswire. And at the time, it was the absolute best place where you could get gambling breakdowns for the sports bettor. And that's where I was first introduced to this yards per point statistic. And yards per point is just that. You take the total number of yards and divide it by points. The lower number is better on offense. It means you're quite efficient. The higher number is better on defense. That means you're forcing teams to waste a bunch of yards. And then I went back and noticed, not surprisingly, the more efficient teams on offense and defense had the better spread records. So I thought I had discovered the Holy Grail, and I started religiously betting simply on the teams that had significantly better yards per point than their opponent. And I found out just the opposite happened. In reality, I would have been better off betting the other side. It wound up costing me a lot of money, quite frankly, but it was a learning experience. Now, I disregarded that yards per point statistic. That turned out to be an even bigger mistake than blindly betting on it. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment, but I finally realized years later that the yards per point was a lagging statistic, I should say, not a lead statistic. And that is what one of the many things that separate the pro gamblers from the square player, knowing the difference between a lead indicator and a lag indicator. Now, pretty much simultaneously, you'd watch a football game and they'll tell it to you even today that the team that wins the turnover battle is generally the team that's going to win the football game. And they would tell you the bigger the gap is in turnovers, the more likely a team was going to win. That if a team had a +2 turnover ratio for the game, they had a very good chance at winning. If they had a +3, they would win 80% of the time, and so on and so on and so on. And again, I used to take the turnover statistic and figure, well, the team that had the better turnover ratio is more likely to cover, right? Well, wrong. Now, I've also heard a handicapper say the toughest thing to predict is turnovers. In fact, I think his favorite quote is, you can't predict turnovers. That is right, but then again, it is wrong. We can actually predict that it's difficult for teams to maintain the great turnover ratio, where conversely, teams with poor turnover ratios, they have the biggest upside. They are the most correctable errors. So in reality, much like the yards per point, the turnover teams with a bad turnover ratio have the biggest upside. Teams with a great turnover ratio have the biggest downside. And I finally put two and two together, and after years and years of experience, but that's what experience is, found out that yards per point and turnovers are generally lag statistics and are the toughest to maintain. And as I started to learn from very experienced pro gamblers and some of the best handicappers in the business, I learned under Ray Scott, a legendary announcer who turned handicapper. Hank Stram, Hall of Fame football coach, became a sports handicapper, among the people who taught me. And they taught me that you want to look at deceptive box scores. That is, when a team greatly wins the net yardage battle but winds up losing the game, they are underplaying their statistics, while the other team has been overplaying their statistics. And over the long run, after 3, 4, 5, 6 games, you're going to find out which teams have the biggest upside by finding out which teams have very good net yardage statistics but not so good straight-up records, and just vice versa. Teams that have great straight-up records but not so good net yardage statistics, they're going to be the teams that have the biggest downside. and I found out that this was actually a lead statistic. But the single best lead statistics of all, no question about it, are the yards per point, yards per pass, and yards per play. But more importantly is relative to what a team normally allows. So in other words, let's say Team A averages 4.7 yards per rush, but it's against teams that normally allow, entering the game, a cumulative average of 4.2. That means they have a good rushing attack at a plus 0.5 net yards per rush, where conversely Team B also averages 4.7 yards per rush, but it's against teams that are normally giving up 4.7. So that means it's average. And we'll give, as I said, a shout out to StatFox, which is the best public database for this statistic. It is kind of like a strength of schedule for each unit on offense and defense against the pass and against the rush. And the yards per rush, yards per pass, yards per play relative to what a team normally allows, they are the best lead statistics. They measure actual talent, where the lag statistics I talked about tend to measure talent to a certain extent, but quite frankly, good fortune. And then I combine the two, lead statistics and lag statistics. I came up with performance gap analysis. The theory, and as my clients know, it's proven true, teams with good lead statistics but bad lag statistics have the upside. Conversely, teams with the great lag statistics but not so good lead statistics have the biggest downside. And that is what performance gap analysis is. The old saying, past performance is not indicative of future results. Well, in fact, as I said, teams that have had good fortune to date are going to be undervalued. Bad fortune are going to be overvalued. And that is exactly what performance gap analysis is. Now, like everything else that I tell you in all of our podcasts, our videos, and our articles, it's not the only thing that you do weigh. You combine it with all kinds of other stuff such as spots, scheduling, motivation, the matchups, etc. But let there be no doubt, without looking at personnel, without looking at sandwich games, letdown games, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, performance gap analysis, which is using the positives of the lead statistics and the negatives of the lag statistics, pitting them against each other, you've got it. The single most important and winning theory statistically is just that, performance gap analysis. You want to see it in action and winning for you? You get them when you get my picks, God's Tips, at offshoreinsiders.com. www.offshoreinsiders.com.